MyPro est une plateforme unique où vous pouvez trouver des professionnels de confiance et obtenir des conseils, mais également un accompagnement dans vos projets ambitieux dans le domaine agricole. Le dit-on souvent, une personne intelligente apprend des erreurs, mais une personne vraiment sage apprend des erreurs des autres. Les experts l'ont fait plusieurs fois et pendant plusieurs années. En travaillant avec eux, vous économisez beaucoup de temps, mais également beaucoup d'argent. Si vous pensez que c'est cher d'engager un professionnel, attendez d'engager un amateur. Pour être informé de nos prochaines vidéos, likez et abonnez-vous.
Okay, today we are going to talk about the creation and management of a plantain plantation, because today plantain production is a business that is profitable and that at the long run can change the life of the local farmer. So, to do plantain production, there are certain things we need to know. The first thing is planning. Planning is very, very important if we want to succeed in our plantain plantation, because the Englishman says, failing to plan is simply planning to fail. So we need to plan before we start anything concerning plantain production. What do we mean by planning? Planning simply means if we want to enter into plantain production, we need to first of all establish our objectives. We want to do production for what purpose? If it is to sell, for which market? Is it a local market? Is it a regional market? Is it an international market? If we identify our market, the next thing to know is what form of the plantain do we want to put in the market? Is it the fresh bunch? Is it processed plantain? After knowing that, we now need to identify where we have to grow this plantain. After identification, we now need to know the variety, because there are several varieties of plantain. At the level of Kabab, we have more than 145 varieties of plantain alone. So, and these plantain varieties are specific for specific products and for specific market. So after identifying our variety, we now need to know how much it will cost to install this plantain plantation. Knowing how much it costs, it means we need to know where we get that money from. Identifying the source of the finance, the next thing is to know where we have to get the planting material. Because we now have our variety, we need to know where to get the planting material and the quantity of planting material needed to establish our plantain farm. All this is still planning, but still at the level of planning. After obtaining the planting material, after knowing where we get the planting material, the next thing to know is where the labor will come from. If we have to install irrigation, what will be the cost of that irrigation system? Where we have our land, is there the source of water? All these are planning. After we finish planning, we can now say we have our business plan. We can now go into installing our plantain plantation. The first thing to do is to identify the site where we have to plant these plantains. And identifying the site, the primordial thing to know is that the site must be accessible. Accessible for inputs that we will take to the farm, accessible for collecting our end product and getting them out of the farm to the market, because it is needless to install our plantain farm where it is not accessible. In that case, we are going to have a lot of losses. Now, we've identified our farm, our site. It is accessible. The next thing to do is land preparation. Land preparation can be mechanic, it can be manual, it can be chemical. It now depends upon where we are found. If we are in a forest zone, we need to do mostly manual, because there are a lot of trees. We need to first of all do the underbrushing, do the felling, and then we crisscross the wood before we do our lining. And for our plantain plantation to be sustainable, we need to avoid burning. So that is for the forest zone. For the savanna zone, we don't have big trees. We can do it manually, we can do it chemically or mechanically, depending upon how flat the land is found. So after having prepared the land, we need to do our lining. Lining will depend upon the density. It depends upon the variety. It depends upon the objectives. After lining, we do our holding. And holding too is a very, very important aspect in plantain production. There are various dimensions, but at the level of research, the dimension that is profitable is 40 centimeters wide, 40 centimeters long, and 40 centimeters deep. This is the ideal dimension. If we do holding less than that dimension, most of our plantains will fall before flowering, and we're going to have a lot of loss. If we do it deeper than the 40 centimeter, we are actually wasting energy, resources, and time. And also, if we do it deeper than 40, the plantain that we plant, they will need to grow up and get out of that depth, thereby wasting a lot of energy that would have been used for its growth and development, for it to get out of that hole. So in order to do planting and good plantain plantation, it is good to respect this depth. The next thing is to plant the plants. It is advisable to use clean planting material. Clean planting material. If we use clean planting material, we are sure that our farms will be sustainable. We are sure to harvest in good quantity. If the materials are clean and are homogeneous, it means they are going to grow together. They will fly together. We can easily program harvesting. That is why we do advise farmers to use the pith planting material, which is being produced by Calbab. In that case, they are quite sure that the materials are clean. They are quite sure that it is the same variety, because today we are producing for a particular market, and we know the market is specific for specific varieties. After planting, we need to manage the farm. Management means we need to control weeds, pests, diseases. We also need to control weeds. And then management also means we need to fertilize the plant. We need to control flowering, and we need to control harvesting. Meaning that we need to know our varieties very well, so that we know in each zone, after flowering, it will take this time for it to be harvested. After harvesting, it now depends upon our objectives. If our objective is to supply fresh green plantain to the market, we carry them to the market. If our objective is to process it, we can now move our bunches to our processing unit. So in a nutshell, that is the process of creating and managing a plantain farm. The next thing to know, which is quite important, is do we do sole cropping? Do we do association? For example, here we have our plantain, which is mixed with other crops, and they are mostly leguminous crops. These leguminous crops are crops with short cycle, 3 months, 4 months. So when we plant our plantain, we intercrop them with these leguminous crops, and most of these crops are crops that don't have nematodes, which are specific to plantains. So these crops, they will help us to suppress the weeds. These crops, they will help us to provide funds that will be needed to manage our plantain farm, because these crops will be harvested 3 to 4 months when the plantains are still young, and that money will now be used to manage the plantain farm. After about 6 months, this plantain farm, they are going to cover, and then they will shed this area so that weeds will not easily grow. So in this situation, we call these crops, these leguminous crops, we call them our breakfast, and we call the plantain our lunch and our supper. Simply meaning that while waiting to harvest the plantains, we start making money from this leguminous crop. So this is an association that we recommend those who want to enter into industrial plantain production, because it will go a long way to help them reduce the cost of herbicide. It will help them get money that can easily manage the plantain farm. It will also help them reduce the cost of pesticide that will be used to treat the plantain. And there are other situations wherein other crops are planted, like tomato, like watermelon. These are crops that need watering, irrigation in dry season. These are crops that need fertilizer. These are crops that also need pest control. So as these crops will be controlled, the plantain will now benefit from it. Therefore, our costs of production for the plantain will greatly reduce if we do associate them with these leguminous crops. planting density, it depends upon our objective, it depends upon the variety, it depends upon the cropping system. If we are doing sole cropping, plantain sole cropping, in a fertile area, we can plant at 1,667 plants per hectare, meaning that we are planting at a density of 3 meters by 2 meters. If we want to put in place a seed farm, we can plant at 2,500 plants per hectare, meaning that we are planting at a distance of 2 meters by 2 meters. If we want to associate plantain with fruit crops or with perennial crops like cocoa, like coffee, we now plant at 3 meters by 3 meters. The plantain will now be 1,111 plants per hectare. If we want to go further, by saying that we are going to allow 2 or 3 successor plants, we can now increase the density to about 800 plants per hectare for the first cycle. In this case, we can allow 2 successors. It will now go to 1,600 plants for the second cycle. If we are allowing 3 successors, it will go to 2,100 plants per hectare. So it all depends upon our objective, upon our cropping system, and upon the varieties that we are planting.
Pro est une plateforme unique où vous pouvez trouver des professionnels de confiance et obtenir des conseils, mais également un accompagnement dans vos projets ambitieux dans le domaine agricole. Le dit-on souvent, une personne intelligente apprend des erreurs, mais une personne vraiment sage apprend des erreurs des autres. Les experts l'ont fait plusieurs fois et pendant plusieurs années. En travaillant avec eux, vous économisez beaucoup de temps, mais également beaucoup d'argent. Si vous pensez que c'est cher d'engager un professionnel, attendez d'engager un amateur. Pour être informé de nos prochaines vidéos, likez et abonnez-vous.